All right, so you wanted to take a deep dive into the Book of Psalms. We've got excerpts from scholarly texts, some intriguing historical insights, and even a peek into the actual text itself from a dramatic YouTube reading.
It's a fascinating mix that lets us explore these ancient poems from multiple angles,
Hmm.
really uncovering those layers of meaning you might miss with a simpler approach.
Exactly. So, our mission is to unearth those key messages of the Psalms, understand the historical backdrop they were written against, and hopefully discover some hidden gems along the way.
Sounds like a plan.
Let's get started. I'm particularly struck by how often the Psalms emphasize God's absolute power and control over, well, everything.
It's a dominant theme, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it makes sense when you think about the historical context. Imagine yourself as an ancient Israelite, surrounded by those hostile empires. You're facing constant threats to your very existence. The idea of an all-powerful God who controls the forces of nature, the fate of nations, even the outcome of your battles, that's a pretty powerful source of comfort.
Makes sense. It's almost like their belief in God's sovereignty was a survival mechanism in a way, a way to cope with those very real dangers they face daily.
Yeah, precisely. But it's not just about raw power either. The Psalms also highlight God's justice, his righteousness. It's establishing this moral order in a world that often felt chaotic and unpredictable.
So it wasn't just about God being in control, it was about God being a just and righteous ruler.
Hmm. That brings me to another point that really stood out to me, the vulnerability and raw emotion expressed in so many songs. It's not just praising God's power, it's crying out for help, admitting weakness, expressing doubt, even anger.
It is striking, isn't it? You have these figures, some of them kings and leaders, just pouring out their hearts to God, confessing those fears and failures. It makes you realize these ancient poems weren't just for show, they were born out of real human struggles.
Yeah, it's like they're giving us permission to be honest with God, to bring our full selves to the table, even the messy parts. Exactly. And that honesty is incredibly powerful. It normalizes the human experience of doubt, of fear, of struggle,
Yeah.
reminding us that even those closest to God go through tough times.
Okay, so we've got this God who is all powerful, just, and righteous, but also approachable and willing to listen to our cries for help.
And that leads us to another crucial aspect of the Psalms, the multifaceted portrait they paint of God's character. It's not just about power and judgment. There's also this deep emphasis on God's mercy, love, and faithfulness.
It's like a balancing act, isn't it? This tension between God's absolute power and his unwavering love for humanity.
Right. It's a tension that runs throughout the Bible, really, and is especially pronounced in the Psalms. But this tension creates a sense of hope and comfort. Even when we mess up, even when we stray from God's path, his love and mercy remain constant.
It's like a safety net, knowing that no matter what we do, God's love is always there, waiting for us to return. And this idea of God's unwavering faithfulness ties into the theme of trust and dependence that we see so often in the Psalms.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing our own limitations and placing our trust in a higher power. Remember, the Israelites faced constant threats and uncertainties. Relying on God wasn't just a spiritual choice. It was a matter of survival.
And isn't it fascinating how this ancient concept of trusting in God still resonates with us today? I mean, we might not face the same external threats, but we certainly have our own anxieties, our fears, our uncertainties. And many of us still find solace and strength in the idea of a God who is bigger than our problems, who offers a source of hope and stability when life gets tough.
It's true. And that brings us to a really interesting point, the way the songs acknowledge the darker aspects of human nature. They don't shy away from our flaws, our tendency to make mistakes, the consequences of our actions. There's a lot of introspection, reflection on the brevity of life, the inevitability of death.
Yes. And it's not sugar-coated, is it? The Psalms can get pretty blunt about our capacity for selfishness, greed, and even violence.
Exactly. But this honesty is crucial because it sets the stage for seeking forgiveness, for reconciliation with God. The songs don't just point out our flaws, they offer a pathway back to wholeness and restoration.
It's like acknowledging the problem is the first step to finding a solution. You can't fix what you don't acknowledge, right?
Precisely. And that acknowledgement often leads to a renewed sense of gratitude and a desire to praise God for his mercy and forgiveness. Which brings us to another key aspect of the Psalms, the vibrant, often ecstatic expressions of worship and praise.
It's like a roller coaster of emotions, isn't it? From deep despair and cries for help to these bursts of joy, gratitude, and awe at God's greatness.
And this shift in tone reflects the cyclical nature of faith. It's not a straight line. It's a journey with ups and downs, moments of darkness and moments of light. The Psalms capture this beautifully, showing us that it's okay to experience the full range of human emotions in our relationship with God.
I love how the songs aren't just quiet contemplation. They're this energetic, almost musical outpouring of emotion. It makes me wonder about how these poems were actually used in ancient Israelite worship. Did people sing them, chant them? Were they accompanied by instruments?
That's a great question, and it leads us to a deeper understanding of the historical context of the Psalms. Remember, these poems weren't written in a vacuum. They were embedded in the social and religious fabric of ancient Israel.
And they give us such fascinating glimpses into that world, don't they? We see their reverence for the temple, their respect for God's law, their struggles with enemies, their hopes for a future Messiah.
And it's not just about abstract beliefs, it's about the lived experience of faith. We see how their faith shaped their understanding of justice, their response to suffering, their approach to community. It's like looking through a window into their world, seeing how their faith informed every aspect of their lives.
So, Psalms aren't just beautiful poetry. They're historical documents that offer insights into a fascinating and complex ancient culture.
And they're also prophetic texts, pointing towards a future that the Israelites believed God had promised them.
You're talking about the messianic hints, right? Those lines that seem to predict the coming of a future king who will rule with perfect righteousness and justice.
Exactly. These passages, often called messianic psalms, are especially significant for Christians who see them as foreshadowing the coming of Jesus Christ. But even for those who don't share that interpretation, these poems offer a powerful vision of a future where goodness and justice prevail.
Okay, so we've been talking about the Psalms in general, but we also have a snippet from a specific psalm, Psalm 1, from that dramatic reading you mentioned earlier.
Psalm 1 is like the opening statement for the entire book, setting the stage for all that follows.
And it does that so powerfully, doesn't it? The language is incredibly vivid, contrasting the fate of the righteous, who are like trees planted by water, flourishing and fruitful, with the wicked, who are like chaff blown away by the wind, ultimately forgotten.
What's fascinating here is how Psalm 1 introduces this central theme of choosing between two paths, aligning your life with God's law and finding true happiness, or rejecting God's ways and facing ultimate destruction. It's a theme that resonates throughout the book, urging us to consider the consequences of our choices and to seek a life that is grounded in righteousness and faithfulness.
It's such a powerful image, and it's presented so simply, so directly. And it makes me wonder, are there other psalms that use such vivid imagery and metaphors to convey their message?
Absolutely. The Psalms are full of rich metaphors and poetic devices that help us grasp complex spiritual truths. And that's what we'll explore further when we continue our deep dive into the book of Psalms. As we unpack these layers of meaning in the Psalms, it strikes me how these ancient poems, born from a very specific context, still manage to resonate with people across cultures and time periods.
It's almost like they tapped into something universal about the human experience, isn't it? These longings for connection, for meaning, for purpose, that transcend any particular time or place.
Exactly. And I think that's part of the reason why the Psalms have been so influential, not just in religious context, but in art, literature, music. They've inspired countless creative expressions, from classical symphonies to modern pop songs.
And speaking of creative expression, I'm curious about the structure and the literary artistry of the Psalms themselves. We've been talking about their content, but what about the form? Are there any distinctive features that set them apart from other types of poetry?
That's a great question, and it gets to the heart of what makes the Psalm so unique. One key feature is their use of parallelism, where two lines express a similar idea in slightly different ways. It creates this rhythm, this symmetry, emphasizing those key themes and reinforcing that emotional impact.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Take Psalm 23, one of the most beloved songs. It begins with that famous line, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." The second line then echoes and expands on that idea. "He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters." See how the parallelism creates the sense of balance and completeness?
Yes, I see it. It's almost like a call and response, where the second line answers and completes the first. It makes it so memorable, too.
Exactly. And this use of parallelism is found throughout the Psalms, adding that depth, that richness to the language. Another distinctive feature is their use of imagery and metaphor, often drawing from the natural world. Think about the tree planted by water, or the chaff blown away by the wind.
Right. Those images are so vivid, so powerful. They make these abstract concepts of righteousness and wickedness come alive in a way that's easy to grasp, even for someone who might not be familiar with the religious context.
And that's the beauty of poetry, isn't it? It has this ability to bypass our intellectual defenses and speak directly to our hearts, and the Psalms are masters of this art.
I'm also struck by how the Psalms are categorized into different types. We've got laments, hymns of praise, wisdom psalms, even royal psalms. What's the significance of these different genres?
Well, it's a way of recognizing the different purposes and functions of these poems. Lament psalms, for instance, express grief, pain, and even anger towards God. They're raw, honest cries for help in times of trouble.
Like those moments when you just want to shake your fist at the sky and ask, why me?
Exactly. And these lament psalms are so valuable because they give us permission to express our pain, our frustration to God. They remind us that it's okay to question, to doubt, to wrestle with our faith.
So it's not about suppressing those difficult emotions. It's about bringing them to God and finding solace, finding strength in His presence, even when we don't understand what's happening.
Precisely. And then you have hymns of praise, which are, as you might expect, full of joy, gratitude, and awe at God's greatness. They celebrate His creation, His power, His love, His faithfulness.
It's like a musical offering, a way of expressing our love and devotion to God through song, through poetry.
And these hymns of praise often have a communal element, inviting others to join in the celebration and experience that collective joy of praising God together.
That reminds me of the point we made earlier about the importance of community in the Psalms. It's not just about individual faith, it's about experiencing faith within a community of believers.
Absolutely. And this communal aspect is particularly evident in the royal psalms, which focus on the king as God's chosen representative on earth. These songs often celebrate the king's victories, his role in upholding justice, his responsibility to care for the people.
So it's not just about praising the king's personal qualities, it's about recognizing his role as a servant of God, someone who is called to lead with righteousness and with compassion.
Exactly. And these royal psalms offer a powerful model of leadership, one that is grounded in humility, in justice, and in a deep sense of accountability to God.
It's a model that's desperately needed in our world today, isn't it? Leaders who are less focused on power and self-promotion and more concerned with serving the common good and upholding ethical principles.
Couldn't agree more. And then you have the wisdom psalms, which offer practical guidance for navigating the challenges of life. They explore themes like the importance of honesty, the dangers of temptation, the rewards of righteousness, and the fleeting nature of wealth and power.
It's like a guidebook for living a meaningful and ethical life, drawing on the wisdom of those who have gone before us.
And these wisdom psalms often use proverbs, parables, even riddles to convey their message, making them both engaging and thought-provoking.
It's like they're inviting us to ponder these deeper truths about life and to apply them to our own experiences.
And in doing so, they challenge us to grow in wisdom and in understanding, to make choices that lead to true happiness and fulfillment.
So we've got these different types of psalms, each with its own unique purpose, its own style, but they all seem to share this common thread of connecting us to something bigger than ourselves. Whether it's God, the community, or the natural world, it's like they're reminding us that we're not isolated individuals, but part of a larger web of relationships and responsibilities.
And that sense of interconnectedness is what I think makes the Psalms so relevant today. In a world that often feels fragmented and individualistic, they offer a powerful vision of community, of compassion, of shared purpose.
It's like they're offering a blueprint for a more just and compassionate world. A world where we recognize our interdependence and work together to create a better future for all.
And that brings us to another fascinating aspect of the songs, their historical context. We've been talking about their universal themes, but they were also written in a very specific time and place. And understanding that historical backdrop can give us even deeper insights into their meaning.
So let's take a closer look at the world of the ancient Israelites. What were their lives like? What challenges did they face? How did their faith shape their understanding of themselves and the world around them?
It's a fascinating journey back in time, one that can illuminate not just the meaning of the Psalms, but also our own journey of faith.
Okay, so we've established that the Psalms were written against a very specific historical backdrop. What can you tell us about the world of the ancient Israelites? What were their lives like?
Well, imagine a world without cars, electricity, the internet. Life for the ancient Israelites was very much connected to the land.
I see.
Yeah, they were primarily an agrarian society, their livelihoods dependent on the cycles of planting and harvesting.
So their lives were governed by those rhythms of nature, those changing seasons, the availability of water, fertile soil. That must have made them keenly aware of their dependence on forces beyond their control.
Absolutely. And you see this awareness reflected in the Psalms, that deep reverence for nature, for the God who controls the rain, the wind, the sun, the moon.
It's like their faith wasn't just an abstract set of beliefs, it was woven into the very fabric of their daily existence.
Precisely. But life wasn't always idyllic. They faced constant threats from neighboring tribes, empires, often finding themselves caught in the crossfire of these regional power struggles.
And this constant threat of war, of violence, must have had a profound impact on their worldview, their understanding of God, even their relationship with each other.
Absolutely. And the Psalms reflect this struggle, this tension between trusting in God's protection and acknowledging the very real dangers they faced. We see this in those lament psalms where they cry out to God for deliverance from their enemies, for justice against those who have wronged them.
Right, so their faith wasn't this naive belief that everything would always be okay. It was a way of grappling with those harsh realities of life, finding strength and hope in the midst of suffering.
Exactly. And this brings us to another important aspect of their world, the centrality of the temple in their religious and social life. The temple in Jerusalem wasn't just a building, it was the symbolic heart of their nation, the place where heaven and earth met, where God's presence dwelt among his people.
So going to the temple, it wasn't just about fulfilling a religious obligation, it was about connecting with the very source of their identity, their history, their hope for the future.
Precisely. And many of the Psalms reflect this longing to be in God's presence, to experience the joy and renewal that came from worshiping in the temple.
It's like a spiritual homecoming, a return to that source of their strength and inspiration.
And it's also a reminder that faith isn't just a private individual affair. It's something that is lived out in community, in shared rituals, in those celebrations.
And this communal aspect of their faith ties into that strong emphasis on justice and righteousness that we see in the Psalms. It wasn't just about personal piety, it was about creating a society that reflected God's values. A society where the poor and oppressed were cared for, where the laws were upheld fairly, where everyone had a chance to flourish.
Absolutely. The Psalms are full of calls for God to judge the wicked, to defend the vulnerable, to establish righteousness in the land. It's a powerful reminder that faith has social implications, that it calls us to work for justice, work for compassion in the world around us.
So, the Psalms are not just beautiful poetry. They're a window into a fascinating and complex ancient culture, a culture that grappled with many of the same challenges we face today: war, injustice, the search for meaning and purpose.
And what's amazing is that these ancient poems still speak to us today, offering comfort, guidance, and inspiration as we navigate our own journeys of faith.
Yeah, it's like they've tapped into something timeless about the human spirit, something that transcends any particular time or place.
Exactly. And that's the power of the Psalms. They invite us to connect with God on a deeply personal level, to express our joys and sorrows, our doubts and fears, our hopes and dreams.
And in doing so, they remind us that we're not alone on this journey. God is with us, listening to our cries, offering his unwavering love and support.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the Psalms, I encourage you to keep exploring these ancient poems. Let them speak to your heart, challenge your assumptions, and guide you towards a deeper understanding of yourself, of God, and the world around you.
And who knows, maybe you'll even be inspired to write your own psalm expressing your unique experiences and insights.
It's a beautiful thought, isn't it? That these ancient poems can still spark that creativity, inspire us to find our own voices, our own ways of connecting with the divine.
Well, it's been incredible exploring the Psalms with you. Until next time,